redesigning basic skills pathways. Some of you may be involved in things like CAP, or looking at acceleration, creating more systemic professional development on campuses. At the cohort level, we see things like orientations, summer bridge, things like that. We have a Bridges to Success program at MiraCosta that helps to remediate some math skills over the summer. Interventions, we see things like supplemental instruction. And then the practitioner level, professional development and inquiry teams. Now, we in California Community Colleges have done professional development for a very long time. But if your college is anything like my college, it tends to be very scattered, and the focus of the professional development tends to not be very intentional. And definitely not very intentional when it comes to focusing on work around equity and focusing on work around increasing the capacity of faculty to work with students of color and specifically men of color. So that's where we're going to focus our presentation for the next 45 or so minutes, is on the professional development and increasing the capacity of faculty to work with students and specifically men of color. And we believe that even though this program is focused and targeted on working with men of color, that a lot of these strategies are really strategies that can work with all historically underrepresented and underserved student groups. So with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Wood.
All right. The program that we're going to talk about is a program, it's an online certificate program in teaching men of color. We refer to it as the core program or the core training. How many of you have either heard of this program before or seen something about it? Okay. How many of you, anyone here participated in it before? Okay, great. So one of the things that we recognized early on as we began doing this work with men of color is that there's a large challenge, and largely that challenge is taking place in the classroom. In terms of the educational experiences of these men, they're not getting the same kind of education that other students are getting. And we know that a lot of this deals with the teaching and learning dynamic. One of the things that has become glaringly obvious is that most faculty members want to do and support all their students, including men of color, but oftentimes they simply just don't know how to do so. If I think about my own training as an academic, I'm a faculty member here at San Diego State. I teach in a college education, but I was never formally trained how to teach, let alone how to teach underserved students. It's part of my research, it's part of what I do, so I've learned different pieces and components over time, but it's typically not part of a formal training process. Now, in community colleges and universities alike, most of our faculty members are subject matter experts. If you're a biology instructor in a community college in Pennsylvania, typically you went and you got a bachelor's degree in biology, you might have worked in the field for some time, you came out, you got a master's degree in biology, and now you're teaching. That's typically how the pattern looks. So what we know is that many faculty members have never been trained how to teach in general, let alone how to teach our men of color. And so what we recognize is that there was a need to have an intervention that really prepared folks to do this, recognizing that it's one of the main areas where we're seeing breakdown. So while we created this program, you can see on the right-hand side some of the target intervention areas. You'll notice that it aligns directly with the information that we have in the Teaching Men of Color book, because this book actually serves as the mandatory reading for the actual program. So you'll see those things: racial microaggressions, understanding of collaborative learning, high expectations. Learning how to do those things and how to enact them in the classroom is a core component of the training. You can see that it's been, because of its success so far, it's been featured by a number of different organizations, including the Huffington Post, Diverse Issues, and some other groups as well. And we'll talk about some of the delivery formats of it, but we want to first begin with giving you some information about the program philosophy. So first is that faculty members and other educators are key. But why are faculty members key? We know that faculty members are in the classroom, they're interacting with students oftentimes more than any other person on campus. Now, we all have on our campus critical educators who are agents of change, who are in the counseling department, who are counseling faculty, who are academic advisors who go above and beyond for our students and have great connections with our students. But by and large, most students, if they're interacting with somebody, they're interacting with their faculty members, right? So they have the most structured opportunity to influence outcomes for our students. We also know, and this is something that a lot of people might disagree with at first, we believe that all educators can teach men of color. We do believe that. But we also believe that you have to teach them as men of color. And you can't remove that component of their identity from that educational process. And we'll let Dr. Harris talk about that when we get to his component of this presentation, the role that identity plays in this process. We also know this: the strategies that work for men of color oftentimes work for our other underserved students and our other students of color. But what we know is that they have an intensified benefit for our men of color, and there's a number of reasons why that occurs, which I'll get to in a few moments. So in terms of the structure of the program, it's a one-week online professional development intervention. Basically, colleges that participate, it's a year-long partnership to make it available to their faculty, and there's 24 one-week session opportunities for faculty members to participate in the program. It has video lectures that talk about different topics related to men of color. There's the guidebook that goes along with it. There's supplemental readings from the scholarly literature that have been done on men of color. There's assessments that follow each of the modules. There's live interactive sessions that take place twice during it. So typically on Wednesday and on Friday, we have live interactive sessions where folks come in and they want to ask and get real questions answered. So and it looks different. Sometimes it's directly related to, hey, I was reading this, or I saw this in the module, can you explain that more? Sometimes it's that. And sometimes it's, hey, I have X student in my class, and this is what I'm experiencing. Do you have any suggestions? And we can give suggestions that are research-based, that are focused on faculty members who've had a proven record in working with these students. There's also discussion forums and pre and post assessments that go along with it. In terms of the modules, there's 4 primary modules that go along with it. One is focused on factors that necessitate enhanced focus on teaching learning for men of color. So what we're talking about in that module are things like the background external pressures that oftentimes inhibit success for men of color, whether it's transportation concerns, whether it's work challenges, whether it's stressful life events. We have to take that into account when we're designing any sort of teaching and learning strategies for these students. We also have to take into account the role that race, racism, and stereotypes have and play in that process. We have to take into account the role that identity has, racial identity, masculine identity, and other identities. So we talk about what these things are as a foundation for everything else. So for example, if we recommend at one point in the program, hey, you should be doing X, we don't just tell you should be doing X. The focus is to say, okay, you should be doing X because it helps address these 3 or 4 different key areas. So oftentimes what we'll find out with faculty, again, they'll hear oh yeah, it's important for me to do it, but I don't typically do it. But if you give them a rationale that helps to provide them with the understanding of why they should be doing it, we find that they're more likely to do that, which is pretty straightforward. Second module talks about theoretical and epistemological foundations. Basically, what's the theory that's out there? What is known? There's been research that's now been conducted on men of color, Black, Latino, Southeast Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander men since really the late 90s. So there's a lot that we know, right? What is it that we know, and how can we then take that information and use it to improve our practice? The third module, which you're going to get a sneak peek of what some of that would look like, focuses on relationship building. How do we build relationships with these guys, recognizing that they're a foundational precondition to any effective teaching and learning enterprise, and Dr. Harris will talk about that. And then the last area focuses on actual classroom-based strategies, right? In terms of using culturally relevant teaching, how to employ collaborative learning, how do you engage in performance monitoring, how do you do those things that we know are critical to their success. So this is just a snapshot here of the actual modules in terms of what they look like. You go through, you watch the modules. Over here in the top right corner, You can click on resources and they can bring you to some of the additional